December 23, 2024. A quiet port city on the southeastern coast of Spain. 60 miles offshore, in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, a Russian cargo ship is slowly going dark. Its engines have stopped. It's listing to one side. 2 crew members are already dead, and somewhere beneath the waterline, in a compartment that does not appear on any official manifest, sits cargo that multiple governments will spend the next 17 months trying to keep the world from knowing about. The official story released at the time was simple. Engine room accident. The ship sank. 14 survivors were rescued. Russia asked for its crew back. End of story. But here is what actually happened. The ship's captain, sitting in a hotel room in Cartagena, across from Spanish investigators, confessed that his vessel was carrying 2 nuclear reactors, the kind used in submarines, and he told them he was never going to Vladivostok. He believed he was taking those reactors to North Korea. The Spanish government confirmed this in an official statement. Not a leak, not an anonymous source, an official government statement. And then, almost nothing. Silence from Madrid. Silence from Moscow. Silence from Washington. Today we are going to go through this story in full. Every piece of evidence. Every unanswered question. And what this event tells us about the world we are actually living in right now. I'm Grant Williams. This is the Williams perspective. Before we get to what happened in those waters, we need to understand what kind of ship the Ursa Major actually was. Because this vessel has a history that makes the story far more significant than a simple shipping accident. The ship was built in Germany in 2009. It started its life as the Scan Britannia, a commercial heavy-lift cargo vessel registered in the Isle of Man. Over the next decade, it changed names 4 times. Hyundai Britannia, E.T. Palmina, Sparta 3, and finally in 2021 it became the Ursa Major. Each name change came with a new registration in a new country, from Germany to Antigua and Barbuda to Belize to Russia. This pattern, rotating flags and identities, is the signature of what analysts call a shadow fleet ship, a vessel designed to obscure its origins, its ownership, and its purpose. By 2019, the ship was being managed by a Russian military logistics company called Oberon Logistics. The name translates roughly to defense logistics. This is not a private shipping firm. It is a state corporation operating under the umbrella of Russia's Ministry of Defense. For years, this ship worked what military analysts called the Syrian Express, Russia's covert supply line to its naval base at Tartus and its air base at Khmeimim in Syria. Military equipment, weapons, personnel. The Ursa Major was part of the infrastructure keeping Russian military operations in the Middle East alive. In 2022, after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the United States sanctioned the vessel. It was placed on a list of ships prohibited from doing business with American entities. And then, in October 2024, the company that owned it made a quiet announcement that went largely unnoticed at the time. Oberon Logistics publicly stated that its vessels had been licensed to transport nuclear materials. Not nuclear fuel, not waste, nuclear materials. A sanctioned Russian military logistics vessel with a history of covert operations announcing a license to carry nuclear cargo. 17 months later, we know why that announcement was made. On December 2, 2024, the Ursa Major docked at the fuel port of Ust-Luga in the Gulf of Finland. Then it moved to a container terminal in St. Petersburg's docks. Satellite imagery obtained by CNN shows the vessel there on December 4th. Time-lapse footage posted publicly by the ship's own owners shows it being loaded. Containers going into the hull. A deliberate gap left beneath 2 large structures described in the official manifest as manhole covers. 2 white cylindrical objects visible on deck. Both objects were gone by December 11th, the day the ship departed. The official destination, Vladivostok. The declared cargo, 2 manhole covers weighing 45 tons each, 129 empty shipping containers, and 2 large Liebherr cranes. That is the paperwork. Now let's talk about what made Spanish investigators immediately suspicious. Russia has one of the largest and most extensive rail networks on the planet. The Trans-Siberian Railway runs from Moscow to Vladivostok, approximately 9,300 kilometers, and has been doing so for over 100 years. It carries passengers, industrial equipment, military hardware. It connects the western and eastern ends of Russia directly and efficiently. So why would a ship carrying 2 cranes and 100 empty containers leave St. Petersburg, sail down through the Baltic Sea, through the English Channel, down the Atlantic coast of Europe, through the Strait of Gibraltar, across the Mediterranean, through the Suez Canal, across the Indian Ocean, and up through the Pacific, to deliver cargo to a Russian port that could be reached in days by train? The journey by sea takes weeks. It costs significantly more. and it routes the cargo through waters monitored by NATO navies, the Portuguese military, and Spanish maritime authorities. Spanish investigators examined this question carefully. Their conclusion: the maritime route only makes sense if Vladivostok was never the real destination. The Ursa Major was traveling in the company of a second vessel, the Sparta IV, another ship in Oberon Logistics' fleet. Two ships traveling together on an unusual route with a cargo that doesn't match the route. The Portuguese Navy began monitoring the Ursa Major from the air as it moved along the Atlantic coast. Their aircraft photographed the vessel from above. Those photographs would later become part of the Spanish investigation. On December 22, 2024, the ship entered Spanish waters. And then something changed. Satellite tracking data shows the vessel's speed suddenly dropping to approximately 1 knot. For context, a typical cargo ship of this size cruises at around 12 to 14 knots. 1 knot is barely moving. It's drifting. Spanish maritime rescue services noticed the anomaly and made radio contact. The crew's response was direct. "We have the situation under control. No assistance needed." That was the last calm communication anyone would have with the Ursa Major. 24 hours after that radio call, everything changed. The Ursa Major made a sharp course deviation and issued an urgent distress signal. Video footage filmed from a nearby tanker showed the ship listing, tilting heavily to one side. It was not going to stay afloat. The captain, Igor Anisimov, later gave investigators a detailed account of what he had witnessed. He said he personally observed a hole in the hull, 50 centimeters wide, 50 centimeters tall. And here is the detail that investigators found most significant. The metal around that hole was pushed inward. Take a moment to think about what that means physically. When something explodes inside a hull, the force pushes metal outward. When metal is pushed inward, the force originated outside the ship. Something struck the Ursa Major from outside. 3 explosions followed on the starboard side of the vessel. 2 crew members were killed. 14 others survived. Spanish rescue ships moved in to recover the survivors, but they were not the only vessels in the area. Russian military ships arrived in force, and according to investigators, the Russian escort vessel, the Ivan Gren, a Russian Navy landing ship, behaved in a way that investigators later described as aggressive. It ordered Spanish rescue personnel to stay 2 nautical miles away from the sinking ship. Let that register for a moment. A Russian military vessel ordering the emergency services of a NATO country away from a civilian ship sinking in waters near Spain. Spanish rescuers pushed through and recovered the 14 survivors. They were brought to a hotel in Cartagena. The Russian captain was among them, and it was there, in that hotel, that the investigation took its most significant turn. Captain Anisimov began talking. According to the Spanish government's own official statement, released under pressure from opposition members of parliament on February 23, 2025, the captain confirmed the following. He told investigators the declared manhole covers were not manhole covers. They were, in his words, components of 2 nuclear reactors, similar to those used in submarines. He said he did not know with certainty whether those reactors contained nuclear fuel, but he believed they did not. And then he told investigators where he thought the ship was actually going, not Vladivostok. He expected the route to change and to be redirected to the North Korean port of Rason. The cranes on board, he explained, were needed to safely unload the reactors upon arrival. To understand why this matters so much, we need to talk about what was happening between Russia and North Korea in the months before this ship set sail. In October 2024, just 2 months before the Ursa Major departed St. Petersburg, Kim Jong-un made a decision that surprised even seasoned analysts. He sent North Korean soldiers to fight in Russia's war against Ukraine. Not weapons, not ammunition. Soldiers. Estimates put the number at more than 10,000 troops. They were deployed to eastern Ukraine and to the Kursk region, where Ukrainian forces had launched a cross-border incursion. These were not symbolic reinforcements. They were combat troops, armed with North Korean ballistic missiles that had already been tested against Ukrainian cities, giving Pyongyang real, live battlefield data on how Western air defense systems responded to their weapons. This was a significant military exchange. And the question that intelligence agencies and analysts immediately began asking was, what did Kim Jong-un receive in return? The Spanish investigation draws a direct line between those troops and the cargo on the Ursa Major. Consider what the VM-4SG reactor, the type investigators believe was on board, actually represents. This is the propulsion system used in Russia's Delta IV class ballistic missile submarines. Nuclear-powered submarines, vessels capable of staying submerged for months, traveling anywhere in the world's oceans, and launching nuclear missiles. If North Korea received functional reactor components from decommissioned Russian submarines and installed them in its own vessels, it would represent one of the most consequential transfers of military technology in recent decades. A nuclear-powered submarine is not the same as a diesel-electric submarine. It does not need to surface to recharge. It can operate silently for extended periods at depths that make detection extremely difficult. It can carry nuclear missiles and patrol waters close to the continental United States, Japan, or South Korea indefinitely. And here's where the timeline becomes deeply uncomfortable. On December 25, 2025, exactly 1 year and 2 days after the Ursa Major sank, Kim Jong-un publicly displayed what North Korea described as its first nuclear-powered submarine, an 700-ton vessel, most likely at the Sinpo shipyard. Analysts who examined publicly available imagery noted that the vessel's assembled exterior pointed to a reactor already installed. South Korean intelligence went further. According to reporting from the Korea Jungang Daily, intelligence officials assessed that Russia had transferred 2 to 3 nuclear submarine propulsion modules to North Korea in the first half of 2025. Those modules, according to the reporting, came from decommissioned Russian submarines and included a reactor, turbine, and cooling system. This raises a question that no government has officially answered. Was the Ursa Major the first transfer attempt, stopped before it reached its destination? And did subsequent transfers succeed through other channels? One arms control expert consulted by CNN described the significance of this kind of transfer plainly. This is not something undertaken lightly. It only happens between the closest of allies, and it fundamentally changes the strategic calculation for every country in North Korea's neighborhood, particularly South Korea, Japan, and the United States. The Ursa Major sank on the night of December 23, 2024. It came to rest on the seafloor approximately 2,500 meters down, roughly 2.5 kilometers beneath the surface. Russia was not finished. Approximately 1 week after the sinking, a Russian research vessel called the Yantar arrived at the coordinates of the wreck. The Yantar is not an ordinary research ship. It has been the subject of intelligence reporting in multiple Western countries for its suspected role in mapping undersea cables and conducting sensitive operations at depth. In January 2025, a month later, it returned, sending a position ping approximately 20 kilometers from the Ursa Major's last recorded position. During its time over the wreck site, Spanish seismic sensors recorded 4 additional underwater explosions. What was being destroyed at 2,500 meters is not publicly confirmed. But the behavior, a military-linked vessel arriving covertly, spending days over a wreck, followed by explosions, has a straightforward operational interpretation. The evidence was being eliminated. Moscow's public position, stated by Nikolai Patrushev, an assistant to President Putin, was that the sinking was the result of a terrorist attack, possibly organized by one of the unfriendly countries. Russia never specified which country. It never provided evidence, and it never submitted a formal complaint to any international body. The Spanish government released a single statement in February 2025, confirmed the captain's testimony, and has said almost nothing since. Spanish lawmakers who pressed for answers in Parliament received few. The silence on all sides has its own logic. If a Western military covertly sank a Russian state vessel to prevent nuclear proliferation, acknowledging that publicly would require every party involved to explain decisions they are not prepared to defend in public. So, what actually sank the Ursa Major? The Spanish investigation considered 2 primary theories. The first, a supercavitating torpedo. This is a weapon that generates a bubble of air around itself as it travels through water, dramatically reducing drag and allowing it to reach extremely high speeds, in some cases exceeding 200 knots underwater. The Russian Navy developed a version of this technology called the Shkval, but Western navies have developed their own variants. The Barracuda, a torpedo of this type, is referenced in the Spanish investigation as a possible weapon. The critical constraint: only a small number of the world's most advanced militaries possess this technology and the platforms to deploy it covertly. The second theory, favored by at least one weapons expert consulted for this story, centers on the nature of the hull breach itself. A 50 by 50 centimeter hole, metal pushed inward, consistent with a shaped charge placed against the exterior of the hull and detonated. Limpet mines can be placed by divers or by underwater vehicles. They require close proximity to the target, meaning whoever placed it needed to know exactly where the ship was when it would be in position and had the capability to approach undetected. The ship was being monitored. The Portuguese Navy had it under aerial surveillance for days. Multiple Western navies operate in those waters. The ship's location and course were known. What happened after the sinking reinforces the picture. The United States sent a WC-135R aircraft, known as the Constant Phoenix, over the wreck site. This is not a standard patrol aircraft. It is specifically designed to collect atmospheric samples for traces of nuclear activity. It flies over Russia's Arctic test sites. It flew over Iran's nuclear facilities. It is deployed when there is a specific concern about radioactive material in a specific location. It flew over the Ursa Major wreck site in August 2025, and again in February 2026. The U.S. Air Force Base that operates this aircraft declined to provide any information about those flights. The end of 2024 was also the final weeks of the Biden administration. A president who had spent 4 years carefully managing escalation with Russia, avoiding direct confrontation even as U.S. weapons were used in Ukraine. An administration with a strong institutional interest in preventing nuclear technology from reaching North Korea, and an equally strong interest in not publicly claiming responsibility for sinking a Russian state vessel. The timing, the silence, the evidence, they point in a single direction, but no one has formally drawn that line. Let's bring this into focus. Here is what we know with certainty, drawn from official statements, confirmed testimony, and documented evidence. A Russian state-linked military vessel departed St. Petersburg on a route that made no logistical sense for its declared destination. Its captain, under questioning, confirmed it was carrying 2 nuclear reactors intended for submarine use. He expected to be redirected to a North Korean port. The hull was breached from the outside. 3 explosions followed. Russia's military arrived, ordered rescuers away, recovered its crew, and then sent a vessel to the wreck site, after which 4 more explosions were recorded on the seafloor. American nuclear reconnaissance aircraft flew over the site twice in the months that followed. Every government with knowledge of these events has chosen silence. Now, here is what remains genuinely uncertain. We do not know with certainty who sank the ship. No government has claimed responsibility. We do not know whether the reactors have been successfully transferred to North Korea through other means since December 2024. And we do not know what precedent this event sets, because it has never been publicly acknowledged as an event at all. But here is the question I think is worth sitting with. If a Western military covertly intercepted and destroyed a shipment of nuclear technology headed for North Korea, preventing what analysts described as one of the most significant proliferation events in recent decades, that is, by most definitions, a successful operation. But it was also an act of war against a nuclear-armed state, conducted in silence, without any legal framework, without any public debate, without any accountability. The world found out 17 months later through an investigation by journalists in Spain. Is that how decisions of this magnitude should be made? In secret, by people whose names we don't know, accountable to no one outside their own chain of command? Or is the alternative, public acknowledgement, formal justification, international confrontation, simply too dangerous in a world where 2 nuclear powers are already in a proxy war? There is no easy answer here. And I'm not going to pretend there is. What I will say is this: the Ursa Major is not just a story about a ship that sank. It is a story about how the most consequential decisions in international security are increasingly made quietly, without record, at the bottom of the sea. Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one of them. This has been the Williams Perspective.